So we talked about the medieval times. Medieval times being, of course, the year 500 to like, I don't know, 1500, somewhere in there. Okay, and we talked about Periton and how he stacked up our melodies. Then we listened to the super creepy Moors. Remember how creepy that was, Reese?
Yes.
Super creepy. And then we're done with the medieval times. And then the last time we listened to the Renaissance, right?
Yeah.
And
Wait,
then,
I don't know. I forgot.
yeah, that's why we're reviewing, because everybody forgets.
Yay.
And then we checked out all the guys in their funny hats. We listened to Josquin de Pré. And then he wrote something called Ave Maria. And then Ave Maria had these echoes in it, and it was super cool. It was called imitation. It meant that someone would sing a musical line and then another person would echo, so something like this. And we heard the echo. Do you hear those echoes, Reese?
Yes.
Yeah. Josquin de Pré, pretty smart dude. And then we checked out this dude Palestrina and his epic beard. Look at that beard. Oh, man. That's like Lord of the Rings great. And then we checked out Thomas Weelkes, who finally wrote a song in English because he was English. And then I think at the very end of class, we checked out a little bit of Gabrielli. And Gabrielli, of course, was the gentleman who wrote music for the San Marcos Cathedral in Venice. Do you remember what Venice is famous for, Reese?
No.
It's famous for having streets that are canals, since you have to take a boat everywhere. And so in order to go to church, you have to take a boat, at least in Venice. And then Gabrielli wrote this thing for 2 choirs of brass players, and we got to hear some great brass playing. And that was pretty cool. That kind of ties up the Renaissance for us. So really what happened in the Renaissance is lots of instruments were invented, and they really started becoming a lot better at composing. And then at the year 1600, all of the Renaissance composers died. They all died at the same time, Reese. December 31st, 1600. Isn't that tragic?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And then, but once they died, we end up with the Baroque. And look at this. Look at this, Reese. I wrote Baroque in curly letters. Isn't that cool? And so starting about the year 1600, going to 1750, we have this era called the Baroque. And there's a couple things that make the Baroque important. So first thing, we end up with something with mood. Now, Reese, have you ever listened to a piece of music and you were thinking that it was sad? Man, this is really sad.
Yes.
Before. Yeah, that's mood. Okay? And especially if it stays sad the whole time. You know what I mean? It would have unity of mood. It would be the same thing the whole time. That was invented during the Baroque time. We also they figured out how to write down rhythms. They ended up with longer melodies. Like Josquin de Pré wrote Ave Maria. And it's really just 6 notes. But they wrote longer things. We finally have louds and quiets. They write that down. Okay, this part's loud and this part's quiet over here. We've learned about that in 7th grade. And we're going to kind of check out some things. So this is a Baroque orchestra. Now remember, a lot of the instruments were invented, but they're not modern yet. And there's actually a group of people that play in Baroque orchestras, meaning that they go back and they find the older instruments, and then they try to play the music as if it's 300 years ago. Reese, I'll be honest, these are a bunch of nerds. And but it's the best kind of nerds at the same time. So they all get together and they play these classic instruments. And it's mostly violins, violas, and what's called basso continuo, which we don't even use that term anymore. But it's a harpsichord and a bass instrument of some type, usually a bass or a cello. Reese, have you ever heard of a harpsichord before?
No.
Yeah, so this is it looks like a piano, but it's the older version. And so here is a picture of a modern Baroque orchestra. Bunch of people hanging out with the Baroque instruments. Don't worry, they know how to fix them. That was a joke, by the way. I'm sure Evan got that one. And right in the middle there is that harpsichord. It looks a little bit like a piano. if you look really carefully, the keys are flipped around. So we have black keys along the bottom and then white keys inlaid on the top. That's kind of unique. And it still has strings on the inside, just like a piano, but it doesn't have hammers like a piano does. Piano has hammers, but this has things called plectums. So it ends up plucking the strings much differently. I wish I had a better pointer. I can't see my pointer right now. Oh, can I? Nope, can't get any pointers. But if you look really carefully in the middle there, you can see like this curly Q thing. That's actually a French horn. They didn't have valves yet. They play natural trumpets. If you look back there in the trumpets, they have these like weird curly Q things back there. And even the instruments are made out of like different woods. And if they're really... Okay, thanks for letting me know. JJ, I just saw your comment. And even the strings, they try to make the strings out of things that are not metal because they hadn't learned how to make metal strings back in the 1700s. Reese, do you want to guess what they used?
I don't know what they used.
Yeah, it's interesting. Anyone throw it in the chat or turn on your microphone. Anyone know what they used back 300 years ago? They couldn't use metal to make strings. What do you think they used to make strings?
Wood.
What was that, Evan?
Said wood.
I have no idea what you just... Did you say blood? Lead?
Wood.
Oh, horsehair is a good guess. Hey, I see horsehair in the chat box. Hey, Evan, why don't you just use the chat box? We're having trouble hearing you. Horsehair is a good guess. By the way, their bows are made out of horsehair. So it kind of seemed silly to rub horsehair with horsehair. It'd just be too hairy of a situation. Rather, they use animal intestines. Animal intestines. It could be cat intestines or goat intestines. And Taya just put exactly the reaction they should have. The reaction is yuck. Yuck. Because even though it's super yucky, like that is what they used. And it did sound different, you know, and so it sounds a lot more mellow. And so actually Baroque orchestras are much quieter than modern orchestras. But it kind of tells you, like, you know, like if you go back and you try to play Baroque music on modern instruments, it might sound a little different than maybe how it would. So we're going to check out, we're back to the old dead dudes with beards. Claudio Monteverdi. Okay, now Claudio Monteverdi was an Italian composer. He played the viol, and he was a singer. Okay, and he ended up, now he had a bunch of buddies that he would get together with, and this is in Florence. And they would host these parties, and they would have grand old time. And they would, but all his friends were. He had some dancers who were his friends, and he had some people that were in the theater, because you know musicians are often hanging out in the theater because that's where they play concerts and so forth. So, and so that he had a bunch of theater people, and they're like, well, wouldn't it be great if we all could work together? Oh, and they had painters and so forth. And so they all got together and they came up with this idea like, okay, wouldn't it be cool if we could put on a play that had music and dancing, and it would also, you know, we can involve our painter friends, and they could like paint backgrounds and stuff. Anyone know what this is called? Go ahead and put it in the chat box. What is this called when you take music and combine it with theater and add dancing, and then you have your friend paint the backgrounds? Anyone know what that's called? It starts with an O. Lots of people aren't sure if they like these very much. Let's see if anyone puts it in the chat box. Still waiting. Taking a long time. Starts with an O. It's actually opera. And this kind of brings up, orchestra is a good guest. We're looking for opera, though. So imagine that, you know, an opera has an orchestra in it. Actually, an orchestra is a really old Greek term that refers, well, I'm not going to get too much into that. But it kind of gives you an idea. It's like all these things combined. And so Claudio Monteverdi and his friends invented opera, and it came out of these parties that happened to be in Florence. And what I love about these presentations is it kind of like gives you an idea, like, oh, wait a minute, like people came up with that. Like, yeah, it was just this dude with a beard and his idea. So opera is theater plus music plus ballet. It is a very complicated and very expensive art form, albeit it may surprise you on how long it takes to put together an opera. Reese, do you know how long it takes them to put together an opera?
A long time.
Yeah, like 10 years. Isn't that kind of crazy? So, like when down in Los Angeles, they have the Los Angeles Opera, if that makes any sense. They are currently planning operas as best they can for like 2030. So they got their calendars out and they're like putting things in place so that they can hire the singers. It takes about 5 years to hire the singers. And then about 5 years out, they start rehearsing. Isn't that insane? Just say yes, Reese.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And there's 2 parts to an opera. Okay. There's the part which they sing, and there's the part that they talk. And actually, you guys are really familiar with this because Disney movies are operas. So if you've ever watched and enjoyed a Disney movie, you have watched and enjoyed an opera. Now, granted, those are modern operas, and those are made for people that are like us, like, especially if you've ever seen, like Snow White or Sleeping Beauty, and are like, oh, that's old. That music sounds old and sounds classic. Well, that's because it was made for people, gosh, when did Sleeping Beauty come out? 1950? It was made for people back in the 1950s. Not necessarily made for you, although it's still enjoyable to watch and so forth. But what do you have? You have the singing parts and you have the talking parts. Those are the 2 parts of an opera. So we're going to check out one of the very first operas that was ever produced, and it was called Orfeo. Okay. And a pretty big orchestra. So it had soloists, it had a chorus, a big group of people that would all sing together. It had dancers and a 40-piece orchestra. We're starting off, our opera is incredible. It does both recitative and aria. Recitative is the sung speech. And so they would, instead of talking out the parts that now Disney movies do, they would kind of like half talk it, half sing it. And then there would be an aria. But we really have to figure out what's happening in this story. Does anyone know the story of Orfeo and Eurydice? This kind of goes back to some Greek stuff. Anyone know the story of Orfeo and Eurydice? You can put yes or no in the chat box. It's okay if it's a no. I just want to see. Nope. No. Not really too sure. Okay, I'm going to give you I'm sure once I remind you of this story, some of you may have heard of this. So it's an old Greek story. And here's the idea. We have Orfeo. He's the boy in the story. And we have Eurydice, who's the girl in the story. They are in love. And so they're hanging out in the field. And I don't remember exactly what happens. But Eurydice gets bitten by a poisonous snake. And she keels over dead. Okay. And then Eurydice is dead, and then she gets sucked into the underworld. So the underworld guy comes up and takes her away down to the underworld. And Orfeo is, as you can imagine, his girlfriend just kicked the bucket. She got bit by a snake. Is absolutely, it's beside himself with grief. And so he decides, and granted you, this is a story, that he decides he's going to go down into the underworld and fight the Lord of the Underworld and bring Eurydice back. And I'm telling you the whole story here because eventually at the end, Orfeo does fight and the Lord of the Underworld and wins. But then the Lord of the Underworld says, okay, you can walk back with Eurydice, but she has to walk behind you. And if you turn back and check on her, then she will turn into stone or go back into the underworld, something like that. And then Orfeo does check, as he's walking up, and he does check, and then she of course turns to stone, and well, that's the end of Eurydice. So that's actually the whole story, and we're going to check out a part of the story. So this is going to be a recitative and an aria, that Orfeo's going to sing after he hears that Eurydice is dead. And he's going to lay the whole thing out. He's going to talk about he's going to go into the underworld. Now, you're going to hear the harpsichord in the background. We talked about that instrument. And then there's going to be like a bass lute too. So here's the words. You're going to hear tu sei morta. We learned what morir means the other day. And it's going to be, you are dead, my dearest. And I'm just going to whip right through the translation here. He's going to say, as I breathe, you have left me forevermore. Never to return, I remained. No, no, no. If my verses have any power, I will go confidently down to the deepest abyss. And he's going to go down into the underworld, having melted the heart of the king of shadows. Ooh, that's good. And I will bring you back with me to see the stars again. Because, of course, above ground, you can see the stars, down in the shadows you can't. Or if pitiless fate denies me this, I will remain with you in the company of death. Farewell, earth. Farewell, sky. Sun, farewell. So we're going to check out this young man singing. And, of course, because it's opera, do you think it's actually going to be a young man? Nope, it's going to be an old dude. Let's check out a little bit of Orfeo. Now you might be wondering, why is this not in English? Well, it's not a Disney movie, guys. And just a reminder that Orfeo is a musician. So there's also a pretend harp that he's holding, right? I'll bring you back up to see the stars. If I have cruel destiny, then I'll accompany you down in the underworld or accompany you in death. And notice how the melody kind of heads back down. So there we go, guys. That's kind of a great example of the very first opera. And just a reminder, we're going to kind of listen to a couple little operas here and there. Mostly what I want you guys to get out of this is, just kind of learn what it is. I don't expect anyone to necessarily like it. But hey, we're going to talk about Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. And Bach came from a huge family of Bachs. There's hundreds and hundreds of Bachs from back in the day. And he was German, okay? He was Lutheran. He was master of the keyboard. And there's a reason I picked this picture right here. And it's because that he was just an amazing keyboardist. Now, playing the pipe organ is a serious instrument. Look at that thing. It has two keyboards. And then it has, those foot pedals. So that's the third keyboard. And then it has all those stops, right? All those pull, push that change the thing. And I mean, guys, if electric guitar is the instrument of nowadays, the pipe organ was like the electric guitar of the 1700s. And Bach was just crushing it. He would travel all around Germany, and they would invite him to play at their church. And he would just go and play all these things, and he could make up stuff on the spot. He could take, some of the church songs that they were singing. He knew them so well that he could play them inside out and backwards, and he would do all sorts of cool things with it. Sometimes people would get mad because the stuff would be so complicated and it was tough to sing along. And then he spent a good amount of his time, he ended up getting hired by a prince. And eventually, so he spent a couple years with this prince, and then he ended up as a choir director in a church for like 35 years. He spent. I mean, it was a long time, and he got a lot of work done. Imagine this: like every single week, he would have just tons and tons of stuff to do, because he would have to write a church service and have that ready by Sunday, and so he'd have to, write out the music and train the choirs. So a couple things here. He did end up having 20 children over the course of his lifetime. 2 wives. He wore one out and then had to go get another one. That's poor wives. I think his first wife, Anna Lucia, had 12 children, and his second wife had 8 children. Anna Magdalena had 8 children. It didn't happen at the same time, like first one, then the other. And he had 2 very important keyboard collections, the Well-Tempered Clavier and, of course, the notebook that he dedicated to his second wife. And we're going to check out, the first thing we're going to check out is something that he wrote for when he was working for that prince. Yeah, Evan, what's your question?
So is it normal for people to have that many kids?
I think 20 is a lot.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just one of those fun little tidbits, but like, wow, Bach had 20 kids. Wow. It's just a lot of kids. I think it's neat. Something that I think you guys will remember. So when he was working for the prince, it was the prince that was nearby Brandenburg. He ended up composing this concerto. And concerto, if you take away the O at the end of concerto, it's just a concert. So it's like, oh, he composed a concert piece. And it's for flute, violin, and harpsichord. So, hey, we finally have some wind instruments involved. And we end up having what's called a ritornello theme. But one thing that like Bach figured out and Bach and the other composers figured out, you could have a quiet part and a loud part. And this is a really good example of that. This is not music from the church. This is the music that he was writing for the princes. And so this is the first time we kind of get to hear some secular music. So music that's not in the church. Church music is sacred, not church is secular. Secular music written by a great composer. So here we go. I'm trying to make sure this is not too loud. And so we have like a little orchestra. And that is a Baroque flute, meaning that they hadn't figured out how to make the metals yet. That would be required for flute, and so it was made out of wood. And notice that even with Bach, just like Josquin de Prez, we have those echoes. And then listen to the harpsichord. You hear the harpsichord part, like it's going on and on. Now, it's really hard to talk about Bach's productive output because he composed thousands of pieces of music. I'm going to kind of skip over here. So next one we're going to check out is a little bit of his organ playing. Now, obviously, like to have a pipe organ in your house is absurd. Very few people, even throughout Europe, could have that. So his pieces for organ are obviously sacred because he would play this organ music basically in church. By the way, many of these organs that he played back in the 1700s still exist, and you can go and visit. You can like go to a church in Germany and they'll have like an organ that Bach played back in the 1700s, and they're still functional. An organ is something that can last, if you keep it well maintained, 600, 800, even maybe 1,000 years, if you treat them properly. So keep on swabbing your instruments, Reese, because your instruments can last a long time if you know how to treat them right. Okay, now what Bach was known for is he was really known for writing instrument stuff together. And the way he would figure it out is he would be able to play one melody on his thumb and one melody with his pinky, or like these two fingers and these two fingers. So he would play two melodies with this hand, and he would play two melodies with this hand, and he would play one melody with his feet. Okay, and that's how he could get 5 melodies going at the same time. So we're going to check out the little fugue in G minor. What fugue means is those echoes. But it's a long melody. So you're going to hear a long melody, and then you're going to hear the long melody again. You're going to hear the long melody again. But as soon as you finish the one melody, so let's say if he played the first melody with these two fingers right here, he would play them with those two fingers or maybe his middle finger. And then he would pass it to his next two fingers. But then these two fingers would play like something else. And he would just like create all these cool little firdly-doos that are happening. So we're talking about 1705. This is for a pipe organ. And this is, of course, played in church. And look at that sweet picture of Bach here. Look at those locks. It's amazing. Here we go. The Fuguetta in G minor. Check out that pipe organ. This is the whole melody. Second time. Now, there we go. There's the third entrance. It's hard to keep track of, but there's actually 2 other melodies happening at the same time. The foot pedals, that's the 4th melody. By the way, Bach used to improvise these on the spot. Oh, I guess this one just has 4 entrances. And then he goes off into somewhere different. And this is what's called a fugue. And a fugue, there's the 5th one right there. And there he goes again. He's just like, it's like a mashup, right? And just move all these melodies around.